Today's scripture reading will be Acts 10, verses 1 and 2. Acts 10, verses 1 and 2. Now there was a certain man, Caesarea, named Cornelius, and centurion of what was called the Italian cohort, a devout man and one who feared God with all of his household, and give many alms to the Jewish people. Pray to God continually.
Going through some sermon prep, I was noticing a retiring of sermon series because we've gone through certain books and certain topics and have concluded them. And I try to ask around and see, what would y'all like to study concerning the scriptures? And something that's been brought up once or twice is character studies. And so what we're going to try and do starting today is a series of character studies, and this one can go on for pretty much the remainder of our lives because there's so many different individuals within the Bible that we can learn from. But I wanted to start out, I wonder, who should we start with? Should we start in the Old Testament? Should we start in the New Testament? Should we choose one of the prophets? Should it be a man? Should it be a woman? Should it be Jesus himself? Should it be Paul, one of the apostles? And one of my favorite character studies, and one that I've been personally studying for a long time now, is Cornelius. And Cornelius is a very interesting individual for a number of reasons. Cornelius, we have some detail about him in verses 1 and 2 of Acts chapter 10. But to give a little bit of background for Cornelius before we actually get into the text, one of the very first things that it says about him is that he was a man of Caesarea, a man who lived in Caesarea. Caesarea, Cornelius lived during the time of Caesarea in this city, and this city was formerly called Stratos Tower. Stratos Tower, before it became Caesarea, it was a 3rd century BC Phoenician port city. And it was eventually renamed by Herod the Great, Caesarea, in honor of Augustus Caesar. And the city dedicated to him and was called Caesarea, or it also goes by a different name, Sebaste or Sebaste, which is Greek for Augustus. And so this city inherently has the name of an emperor. It is dedicated to the king of the entire land. And the reason this is significant is because of the time period that Cornelius is currently in. In the 1st century, if you were a Roman citizen, or really anybody, but especially a Roman citizen, if you denied the emperor's name, if you did not give worship to the name of Caesar, then you were worthy of being put to death. Cornelius lived in a city where his name was uttered all the time. And it was a city that was dedicated to a man who proclaimed to be a god himself. A man that the city was actually rebuilt and renamed by another wicked man, Herod the Great, who was also just a terrible, terrible individual. And this man, Cornelius, lived not only in a city named by a wicked king, but there also was a very specific cult that lived within Caesarea. There was a lot of different religions and false teachings of paganistic beliefs that were taught anywhere in the 1st century. But specifically in Caesarea, there was a teaching called Mithraism, which is a cult who followed Mithras, the god of light and justice. They met in caves, ironically, and practiced rituals. This deity was honored as the patron of loyalty to the emperor. So you can see where a name that was actually a name given to the city, which was the emperor's name, had a cult dedicated to a god that was solely about paying homage and being loyal to the emperor himself. And then you've got a man whose name was Cornelius, who lived in a city named after the emperor with a cult that was solely dedicated to the emperor himself who lived there. And what do we know about this man Cornelius? Well, we're given a few things. The stuff that we're not necessarily going to look at for the application, but definitely needs to be noted for the sake of context. He was a centurion and a leader of the Italian cohort or the Italian band. A centurion, he was one who was the commander within the Roman army consisting of 100 men. Cornelius, just a regular centurion, had authority over 100 men in the military of the Roman Empire. But it mentions a very specific type of a cohort or a band of men. It was the Italian cohort. This was significant. That being specified as the Italian cohort or the Italian band, a band from Italy, and this group specifically was a division within the Roman Empire consisting of 400 to 600 men. The cohort or band that came from Italy were known for consisting of more than just 100 men, which is pretty significant to the context of Cornelius. So think about it for a second. Put yourself in the first century in the city of Caesarea, that was a city named by the emperor himself, by another wicked man, Herod the Great. And within this city, you have a cult that dedicates themselves to being loyal to the emperor and only the emperor. And you are responsible for 400 to 600 men, and you answer to the emperor and his army and his generals. Being a Roman citizen, being a man within the Roman military, you had a lot of power, you had a lot of authority, you had a lot of benefits, but that was only if you were loyal to the emperor. And you being a man of war within the Roman Empire, you gave your life to the emperor, literally and figuratively. You dedicated your life to the king, to the emperor of the entire land of the Roman Empire. And yet, we read of a man who defied all odds, a man who we could consider being put in a very difficult situation of possibly giving up everything or for Christ, or still being loyal to the emperor and keeping his status and keeping his position and keeping everything that the Roman Empire gave him as a military man. Now, this is where we're going to begin our study. In the very first two verses, we already looked at the background and really some historical context of Cornelius and Caesarea. Let's look at the man himself and how he's described by God. Notice what it says. It says, now there was a man at Caesarea named Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian cohort. And this is how God describes him. He was a devout man and one who feared God with all his household and gave many alms to the Jewish people and prayed to God continually. Now, if you were a citizen of the Roman Empire or a soldier to the Roman army, and you read about a centurion, a man over 400 to 600 soldiers of the Roman Empire, you probably were not thinking that he was going to be a very righteous individual. Because depending on your background in the Roman Empire, you would pray to what's called a patron deity. A deity dedicated to either your occupation, something that you enjoy doing, or it was a family god. And Cornelius, being a man of war, most likely his peers would have probably prayed to the god Mars or Ares, the god of war. The Roman god of war was Mars Hill, Acts chapter 17. But the Greek god, what we would probably know him more as, is Ares. He did not pray to Ares. He did not pray to any patron deity. There are some people, some scholars and archaeologists that will say that there was even a specific patron deity to the centurion role, to the position of the centurion, where he didn't just pray to Ares, he prayed to a very specific god that was only helping centurions, this position of war. But Cornelius doesn't fit the regular centurion. He was one described by God as being full of, let's see here, he gave the example of piety. We are going to look at Cornelius, an example of being pious, somebody who is devout. You ever heard the word piety? Piety means one who is devout in religion. They are pious. Now, Cornelius is the perfect example of what it means to be an individual who shows piety, one that shows devout religion to not just any religion, but to God specifically. Now, notice this is going to be our points from these two verses. We see designation of piety by Cornelius, a devout man and one who feared God. God gives a designation of this man is pious. He is one who is devout. He is a devout man and one who fears God, number one. Number two, we see leading with piety. And it says, in all his house. Remember, he was a man of authority. He was a leader. He understood what it meant to lead an army, but he understood also what it meant to lead a household. Leading with piety. We also will see the effect of piety. He gave much alms to the people. And then finally, what we'll notice about Cornelius is the habit of piety, which is he prayed always. Now, I will probably be talking a lot to the men in this congregation, but this will also be, this can be applicable to both man or woman. But the reason I may refer to men, husbands, fathers, is because this is what Cornelius was. He was a man, he was a husband, he was a father, he was a military man. And this can apply to a lot of our leaders within the Lord's church. Now, let's look at our very first point, the designation of piety. Now, it says that he was a devout man and one who feared God. He understood, Cornelius, and remember, we looked at Caesarea, we looked at the centurion and what it means historically, what those two things were. With that being said, and us understanding this, Cornelius understood, because he was a centurion, he understood what power, he understood what authority, and he understood what submission was. He understood what all three of those things were. In fact, if you read in the gospel accounts, there was a centurion that ran up to Jesus. I'm not saying that was Cornelius. I'm just saying one of authority. A centurion went to Jesus and said, I have a lot of men at my disposal, and wherever I tell them to go, they go. When I tell them to stand, they stand. I understand what it means to give a command. So you simply just speak the words and it will be. You don't even have to be there. Just simply say it and it will happen. Cornelius, also being a centurion, understood the authority of God. He understood the power of God, and he understood submitting to God. Now, also being a Roman citizen, under the Roman Empire in Caesarea, a very paganistic and polytheistic city, he understood also what pagan worship was. He understood what it meant to defy the emperor, and he understood the punishment for denouncing the emperor's name. Even though he knew all of these things, he still went with God. And I don't know if we could ever fully wrap our minds around that, because we've never been put in a position where either we serve God or we literally die. But brethren, if we ever come to that scenario, which I hope and pray we never do, but if it is the case that we have to face that, we need to have the courage and the example of Cornelius. Because Cornelius, who understood the consequences of being a follower of God, he still followed God. Now, this word devout, pious, or one who maintained the worship of God, one who is God-fearing, refers to the godly. If you look in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, it says this, 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. It says, "Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment." This word godly in the Greek is the exact same word used here, or the same meaning. It may be a different take on the Greek word, but it's describing a man who is godly, and not just one who is religious or superstitious, as Paul would say in Acts chapter 17. This was a man who devoted himself to Jehovah God. And we see that Cornelius was devout in many things. It says that he was a devout man. Okay, what was he devout in? What was he godly in? Well, he was godly in his worship to Jehovah. He was godly in his spiritual for the spiritual well-being of his family. He was godly or devout in his obedience towards God, in the physical well-beings of others, as well as his relationship with God. Notice this: his worship with God, spiritual well-being of his family, the obedience towards God, the physical well-being of not just his family, but also to those who were strangers to him. Notice, it says that he was a devout man who feared God with all of his household and gave much alms to the people. And we'll see that's the Jewish people later on in this chapter. But Cornelius was a man who loved people. He was a man who was devout to God's creation and to the souls of mankind according to what God wanted him to do. He was a man of benevolence. He was a man of love. He was a man of dedication. When some people look at those in the military, when they're in their uniform, when they're on the battlefield, they're hardened soldiers. They're ready to fight. They've faced death many times. But you know what? I'm sure that if you get to know a soldier, that they're also human. They're not machines. They're not robots. They're human beings. Yes, they're trained for war, but you know what? They also have emotions. Cornelius, yes, understood war, and he understood authority and power, but he also understood love and benevolence and taking care of others. He was a man of piety. He was devout, one who feared God. Now look at our second point, leading with piety. He was one that was not just designated as one being pious, as one being devout, but he was one who led with devotion to God. He was one that led with piety. Notice this: in all his house, literally with all his family in the Greek. It was evident that Cornelius instructed his family and exerted his influence to train them in the fear of God. True piety, notice this, true piety will always lead a man to seek the salvation of his family. Now, men, I'm going to say this one more time, and I want you to take good note of this. True piety will always lead a man to seek salvation of his family. I'm going to be speaking to the fathers and the husbands in the room very quickly. You have a responsibility to your family. You first have a responsibility to God. I understand that. But by becoming a husband and a father, you have been given a responsibility by God to lead that family. But not just lead that family, you are to lead it with devotion to God. And we are to do this according to the way God wants us to do it. It's not just, well, I'm going to lead it in a godly manner, generally speaking, in a religious way. I'm going to lead in a way that is going to bring my children, my spouse, any other family member that is under my authority and under my overwatch, if you will, my care, and I'm going to get them as close to God as I possibly can. Now, as a leader, if you look in the military, especially in the Roman Empire, you gave an order, you listened. If you didn't listen, there were consequences. You know what? Not to the same level or degree, obviously, but within the household, if somebody is defying you and you are the head of the household, men, fathers, husbands, there needs to be some discipline. And if there is not discipline within the home, there is zero leadership, at least not good leadership. And if there is no discipline in the home, there is definitely no godly leadership. Because if you look in the book of Proverbs, what does the proverb writer say? He who spares the rod spoils, literally hates the child. If you are not leading in a godly manner by using discipline, and people, when they hear discipline nowadays, and it will continue to be this way as it has been for many ages now, when people hear discipline, they think abuse, they think beating. You know, my father gets very, very creative with discipline, to the point where he doesn't even lay a finger on me, and I still get the point across. He still gets the point across, and I understand the point that was given to me. Discipline, yes, requires a rod of correction, but discipline is simply instructing in a constructive criticism. It is seeing the potential in an individual and honing that individual, disciplining them to be the best that they can be, in this case, for God. Cornelius understood discipline because he was a military man, but he also understood what it meant to have discipline within the household. And think about it. We're talking about a family during the Roman Empire. Do you understand what was in the Roman Empire during that time? The Roman society allowed quite a few things. I only listed 9 very quickly. There are many other things they allowed, but here's just a list. They allowed pedophilia. That's the very first one on the list. Pedophilia. They allowed homosexuality. They allowed abuse to women. They allowed abortion. They allowed corruption in leadership. They advertised pornography. They allowed prostitution. They allowed idolatry and encouraged sin. And this is not just they allowed these things, they promoted it. In fact, you know how we have billboards on the side of roads that advertise certain things? They would have that, but it was literally painted on the building of what was in the building. And of course, you can understand how graphic these designs may be in order to lure these individuals in to these buildings to perform in these acts. The very religion that these people participated in was prostitution worship. Now, you're probably thinking, man, I wouldn't want to be in the first century. Guess what? We're dealing with the exact same things today. It doesn't matter what century it is, the world is still going to allow pedophilia. The world is still going to allow sexual immorality, homosexuality, abuse to women, abortion, corruption in leadership, pornography, prostitution, idolatry, and encouraging sin, and allowing and promoting many other types of sin. We're really not that different from the first century. That is the world. And if we ever think, man, it's worse than it's ever been, at least it's not just you and 7 other souls. At least it's not you and the immediate family that's the only one faithful to God. Does that sound familiar? And you know what? We even see an example in Noah that was also seen in Cornelius, a man that made sure that his family was going to be on the ark. He preached and proclaimed, a preacher of righteousness, Noah was, to the entire world, but yet he made sure his family was going to be on the ark. Cornelius loved people. He loved to take care of them. He loved to provide for them, but he made sure that his family was godly. This sounds a lot like our country, what Cornelius was facing, which tells us this: we've got no excuse. If Cornelius, a man of war, facing a paganistic society that promotes all of these sins, can have a godly family, brethren, we've got no excuse because we live in the exact same culture. It may not be a physical idol, but we definitely face the same things they faced with the temptations. Now, Cornelius guarded his family, his household, from the immorality of the Roman Empire and really the world as a whole. He made sure his household was committed to God. Now, I'm going to say this, and then this will transition into our next point. As a parent for your children, and perhaps maybe if you are a grandparent and you're the guardian of a grandchild, do not be afraid of guarding your children or grandchildren. Now, you're not going to be able to put a bubble around them. That's not the point of parenting. The point of parenting is not to, I got to be careful how I say this. The point of parenting is to protect them from the world. But the point of parenting really is to prepare them of how to protect themselves from the world. Because you're not going to always be there to protect them. So how can you prepare them to guard against the world? Well, you can't do it by yourself, and they can't do it by themselves. If I could protect my son from the world 100% of the time, I really wouldn't need God. But guess what? I'm human, and I need protection from the world. My son needs protection from the world. And if I have any more children, and my children have children, they're going to need protection from the world. How do we do that? We teach them about God. We have a God-fearing household. Now, how does one show that they are godly? Well, let's look at our next point. We see the effects of piety, the effects of godly devotion. He gave much alms to the people. Now, wait a minute. How? How on earth does this show or teach us how to protect our children from the world, from a worldly point of view, by giving alms to the people? It's not inherently that he gave alms to the people that showed that he was godly. It was his attitude in giving much alms to the people that showed he was godly. You know, what is the greatest commandment? Love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto it, love your neighbor as yourself. That was under the law of Moses. What is the law of liberty, the law that we are under? What is the greatest commandment then? If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And this is the commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And greater love has no one than this, that one laid down his life for his friends. Well, what kind of love is that? That is a giving love. That is a love that seeks out the best outcome for the individual, even if there's a little bit of heartache, even if there is a little bit of hard discussion. You love them enough to tell them the truth and do what is right for them, according to the scriptures. And you know what? What is pure and undefiled religion before God? James says in James chapter 1, at the end of that chapter, that we are to take care of those who really can't take care of themselves, to see to the needs of the orphans and to see to the needs of the widows, and to remain unspotted from the world. You know, Cornelius was doing all three of those things. Well, he didn't. It doesn't say that he was giving to the orphans or to the widows. It says that he was giving to the Jewish people. And you know, I'm sure that these people at the time, the Jewish people, God's people in the eyes of Cornelius, those were God's people. I'm going to take care of God's people. Now, we have to understand the context. This is where a lot of people really get, I don't want to say confused, but they have a hard time reconciling this context. The church has already been established. Cornelius' prayers are being heard, and Cornelius is taking care of Jewish people, which are considered God's people. Now, we have to understand this is a transition period. The church has been established. The new covenant is now in effect. Well, what is the whole point of chapter 10? You know, a lot of people say, how is his prayer being answered? He's not a Christian. Does that mean sinners' prayers are heard? You know, that is a good question, and that is a question that will be answered at another time. But for the sake of time and context, we don't know if Cornelius was what's called a proselyte, or if he was a man that was simply under a different law. We read about that in the book of Romans. They had a law unto themselves, the Gentiles did. Those that followed the patriarchal law, those who were not the Jewish people, they had a law that was given to them by God. Whatever it was, Cornelius was following it. He understood this law that God gave him. Now, how is it passed down to him? We do not have that information. All we know is that he was devout to God. He understood who God was. He understood what was required of him. But now we're under a new institution. And this is what the whole chapter is about. Cornelius, you need the gospel. We are under a different dispensation now. You need to be baptized for the remission of your sins. Well, even though he was needing that within this context, brethren, he was, at the time, he was fulfilling a commandment of God, which was love your neighbor as yourself. You show love to your fellow man. What was Cornelius doing? He was giving alms to the people.
Why is this significant? Well, I'll tell you why it's significant. Have you ever heard of a man by the name of Felix in the book of Acts? Felix was known for being a man who would literally and figuratively stab people in the back. Felix did whatever he could to get to the top, whether that was bribe people, whether that was murder people, whether that was put false accusation on people. Felix, who was within the Roman Empire of high position, did whatever he could to get in a higher position. Cornelius could have done the exact same thing. He was a military man. He had power. He had authority. He had a mini army at his disposal. He had money. We see that he gave much alms to the people. Do you think that he probably could have bribed people? Do you think he probably could have used his army, his men to his advantage to get to a higher rank? Absolutely. I'm almost positive that that's exactly what happened with many Roman generals. But you know what? That's not what he did. Rather than using his money to get himself to the top, he put himself at the bottom to then use his money to help others. That is what a godly and devout man does. Not only does he take care of his family's spiritual well-being and physical well-being, he also is benevolent and searches out opportunities to help those who are in need outside of his household. What else does this say about Cornelius? Well, we get to our final point. We see the habit of piety, the habit of being devout to God. He prayed to God always. As no particular kind of prayer is mentioned except secret prayer, as one commentator would say, we are not authorized to affirm that he offered prayer in any other manner. It may be observed, however, that he who prays in secret will usually pray with his family or in his family. And as the family of Cornelius is mentioned as being also under the teaching of religion, it is perhaps not a forced inference that he observed family worship. Now, what this commentator is noting is that the main point of this quote that I just gave you is this. He made sure to have a relationship not just with his family, not just with those outside of his family to help them. He made sure to have a relationship with God. He made sure to talk to God on a regular basis always. And you know what? He didn't just make sure to have a relationship with God. He made sure that his family knew and saw that he had a relationship with God. Have your children seen you or heard you pray? And praying for the food does not count. That is not what I'm talking about. Breakfast, lunch, or supper. I'm talking about your personal prayers. Do you teach your children to pray? You need to teach your children to pray as soon as they come out of the womb. They can't even open their eyes yet. I don't care. You know they can hear things while they're still in the womb. Pray. Teach them to pray. Out of everything that the apostles wanted to know, that they explicitly asked Jesus to teach them, they said, Lord, teach us to pray. We want to know how to approach our Heavenly Father correctly. You know what? Tommy is already praying. In fact, I remember I said, Tommy, I just see his face go. I'm going to brag on Tommy for a second. The other day, I was watching TV and with Haley, and Tommy was in the floor playing with his toys. We weren't eating or anything. We were just sitting around the living room, just being a family. And Tommy with his toys, he got for Christmas this last year a big cart with a bunch of toy produce and plates and bowls. And he got one of his toys out, and there was a huge bun from a cheeseburger toy that he had, and he put that bun on the plate. And he clasped his hands and he started speaking, and he just was speaking gibberish. And at first I thought, what on earth is he doing? And then I saw his hands. His hands were clasped. And it wasn't really until he said amen that I understood that he was praying. Tommy isn't even 2 yet, and he knows how to pray. You want to know how? It's not because Haley and I are good parents or anything like that. It's because we know how to pray because Jesus taught us. And we are teaching Tommy, and Tommy is going to teach his children and his children after him. And guess what? You need to be doing the same. I'm not saying this in any way to elevate myself. In fact, I am still trying to learn how to pray. I struggle in my prayer life. I need to do better. And I'm pretty sure every single one of us can do better. But guess what? In order to do better, you have to start. Teach your children to pray. Show them, teach them, tell them this is how you approach God. These are the terms that you use. And don't ever think they're too young to understand. Children are way smarter than you believe. In fact, sometimes they're smarter than you. Teach the children to pray, because that will give an atmosphere of godliness. That will raise up a godly household and a godly family. If you can teach a child, one of the very first things to teach them is to talk to God, guess what? You have pretty much laid the foundation of teaching them how to be a Christian. You talk to God. Next step, you teach them how God talks to them through the scriptures. If you can do that, you will have a godly household. You will be what God would describe Cornelius as pious, devout to God. So question. Looking at the example of Cornelius, what can we learn? Well, what we can learn is this. We can learn to be devout in God, devout in our household's spiritual state and spiritual condition. We can learn how to be devout in our benevolence, and we can learn how to be devout in our relationship with God in our prayer lives. Are you devout? Am I devout? It could be that you are not devout. You may think yourself devout, but you're really not as devout as you need to be. Well, I get the kids to church. I'm there every Sunday. That's good. Keep doing it. What else are you doing? Well, we say our prayers at night. We say our prayers for breakfast, lunch, and supper. That's wonderful. Keep doing that. What about the prayers in between the lunch and breakfast and supper times? Well, I give of my means every Sunday morning. That's great. Keep doing that. Who else are you helping? Well, I do all of these things. Why are you trying to make it as little as possible? Well, I do this. That's great. What else can you do? If there is more that you can do, do it. Maybe you're doing everything that you can. You're striving to be the best and devoted Christian as you can, but you live in a paganistic society where there are cults devoted to the emperor, and they are trying to convince you and beat you down that there is no other God except the emperor. And that emperor can be you, that emperor can be the country, that emperor can be money, it can be absolutely anything. Don't be devout to that, and you're struggling, you're fighting against the spiritual warfare, and you need prayers for strength. Whatever the case may be, I beg and plead that you come now, as together we stand and as we sing.